So this is a repeat of advanced troubleshooting. It's not a part 2. So if you were in our session yesterday, it's all the same jokes. It's all the same bit. So if you weren't here yesterday and you're here for the repeat, that's good. If you were here yesterday, now would be a good time to go. I'm kidding. All right, so my name is Scott Stubberfield. I'm on the Lync customer engineering team at Microsoft. And as you can tell by the flag on my title, I am Canadian.
They knew that before you showed the flag.
I know. I'm just making sure you know. I've been at Microsoft 7 or 8 years, started out working in the consulting services business, and then eventually now in the Lync customer engineering team, which is part of our Lync product engineering team. In customer engineering, we work with customers such as yourselves or partners in terms of gathering feedback around Lync, but also deployments of large and complex deployments. And my lovely assistant can introduce himself.
My name is Nick Smith. I've been with Microsoft for about 6.5 years now. Same team as Scott.
My manager. Not just the same team, he's my manager.
So,
he is.
Yep, this is something that we've run a couple of times now.
Yep.
Is kind of a result of some things that we had previously done in some training sessions. And so far it's worked well. So no pressure, Bob, on making this one go well. We have a lovely, how did you put it yesterday? Voluntold?
Yeah. Bob's been...
Voluntold assistant who will be coming up and helping us a little bit later.
Yeah. So the way what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of review some applicable troubleshooting tools that you can use to help troubleshoot in Lync. We'll discuss a systematic approach to troubleshooting. It's kind of how I would think and how I would approach things. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily the exact way that you have to do it, but the key message is figure out what your systematic approach is and stick to it. Don't just start changing things and turning knobs and stuff without actually knowing what's going on in your environment. And then lastly, we'll actually diagnose and resolve some common problems in real time with a randomly selected audience member who may or may not already be wearing a microphone. And so literally I have my laptop here is connected to my home lab, and I've gone in and broken several things. We have kind of a scenario. Users called in, reported a problem, and we'll actually walk through in real time fixing those problems. But as we go, Nick and I will kind of point out some interesting things as we go. And feel free to ask questions. There's a mic. You don't have to come up and stand next to the mic. I don't think anyone has yet. So just feel free, raise your hand, ask a question. I'll repeat it for the recording, and we'll do our best to answer it. Okay, so tools. The title really should say tool, because really we're just going to kind of cover one main tool. And that tool is Snooper. And what I'm calling it here is I'm saying it is the tool to help you diagnose and troubleshoot Lync client and server issues. And what you'll see when we go through this in real time is that most all of the issues that we're going to encounter today, you're actually going to be able to, if you know what you're looking for in the Snooper tool, figure out what the problem is. It doesn't necessarily tell you how to fix it, but it's at least going to be able to help you identify what the problems are. And again, you need to be able to know how to read that, but this is the tool that will help you do that. The Snooper tool has been around for quite a long time. It was originally released way back in the OCS days as part of the resource kit. It's now released as part of a toolkit we call the debugging toolkit. It's a separate download. You install it, and it's there and it's available. The important thing to remember about Snooper is it can be used to read both client-side logs that are captured by Lync endpoints running Lync. It can also be used to read and debug server-side logs. We'll talk in the next upcoming slides how we would recommend that you capture those server-side logs. But the important thing to remember, it's the same Snooper tool that's going to read both sets of logs. The 2013 Snooper tool actually has released a new feature called the ladder diagram feature. So you can actually go in, grab a call leg, and you can say, show me a ladder diagram. And it'll actually show servers and where the client was and the messages that were going back and forth. We didn't previously have that feature. So if you wanted to draw a nice ladder diagram of a interaction in a client log, you had to kind of make it up on your own in Excel or Word or something like that. So that was a big feature ask that we had from a lot of people, and it's now in that tool, which is kind of cool. So the second tool that we'll touch on, which really in itself isn't so much a tool, but just a component of Lync 2013 deployment, is called the centralized logging service. Who's had experience with this before? Okay, a few people. Good. That's more than I think raised their hand yesterday, which is good. So the centralized logging service is something that's new in Lync Server 2013. And it was really designed and developed to improve the ability for a Lync administrator to capture logs of issues that are going on in real time. So how do we do this in Lync 2010? If you had 8 front ends in a pool and you didn't know which front end in a pool was causing a certain issue, you'd have your 8 RDP sessions open, you'd open up the Lync server logging tool, you'd pick your components, and you'd get ready. And then you'd say, okay, are we ready? Yeah. Start across 8 machines, repro your issue, and then go back and hit stop 8 times as fast as you could, right? Really wasn't very efficient. It meant it was a lot of work to actually get to collect the log, right? We want to get you to actually being able to debug and figure out the problem faster, and we wanted to make that easier for you. And that's really the purpose of the centralized logging service. So it essentially enables you to centrally manage the collection, the start collecting of logs, the stopping collecting of logs, and then also searching against those logs. Ultimately, the output is a file that can then be read using the snooper tool. Okay? When we first released Lync Server 2013, when the original release, the centralized logging service was there, all the underlying components were there, but there were no PowerShell commandlets for this. It was an executable that you had to run with certain flags. It's now built into PowerShell at some cumulative update release. I don't know which one it is, but it is in the latest build. So we'll go into a little bit of the architecture of CLS. So basically, there's a CLS agent running on every front-end server, and then there's this centralized controller that's running that handles the starting and stopping of these agents. So in my Lync 2010 example, where I said, you have all your sessions open, and you pick your components, and you hit start 8 times, and then recreate your issue, basically that's what CLS controller is doing. It's starting the collection of logs on servers in your environment, depending on whether you've picked a pool or you've picked all servers in your environment. It starts it, it stops it, and then it actually searches against those files. So we'll move on from there. So there's a number of scenarios that are created for you out of the box in CLS. And you can see them there. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. They're pretty obvious what they are, right? So what do you think we'd be logging for incoming and outgoing call? I don't know, maybe an incoming and an outgoing call, right? That seems, if you were having an issue with an inbound call or an outbound call that wasn't working, that would be the scenario that you would want to pick. These are built-in scenarios. They have predefined list of components, log levels, and types of logging. So then the next logical question is, okay, that's cool, but how do I actually get more detail on what's in each of those scenarios? So you can run this commandlet, get-cs-cls scenario, specify the scenario name, and you'd get output that looks similar to this. Obviously, I've formatted it so it looks really nice in PowerPoint, but you would get that output in a formatted table in PowerShell. And it shows you each and every component that it would be running, including the level and what flag setting. So that would match up to exactly what you would see if you were running it locally on the server in the Lync server logging tool. There's another scenario, and it's called the always-on scenario. And basically, we log every component, but we log it only to the info level. And you can go in and turn on the always-on scenario, and you can have it running so that if there is an issue, you don't have to go back and say, we didn't have logs. We'll turn it back on. We'll capture logs and then see if we can find the issue. Always on is designed to be always running, right? So it's always creating logs. It's dumping them into a directory. There's a maximum file size specified, so it's not going to load the server up. It will roll over after a period of time. But it's designed to be kind of always running. So if you had an issue, someone was complaining about something, you could go in and search against those always on logs, and hopefully there's enough information in there to try and debug what the issue is. If not, it would at least help you understand another scenario that you would want to start up. So the one thing to remember is that always on can be running plus another scenario, and that's the maximum that we can have running. If all I'm running is another scenario, I can't run 2 other scenarios at the same time. So I can have always on and another, or just another. Make sense? Okay. So if the built-in scenarios aren't good enough for you, you can actually create a custom scenario. And what's a custom scenario? Custom scenario is I choose my own list of components, I choose the level, and I choose the flag setting. And I've given you the exact syntax that you would need to run to create your own custom scenario. If you wanted to extend this, all you need to do is create another CLS provider, set the name to the actual component that you would see in the Lync server logging tool, and then add that value here in the end. And you would actually be able to create whatever custom scenario you wanted to. There is a note on this slide, or there's two notes. Number one, when you create this new CLS scenario, it does take a little bit of time before you can then start issuing the CLS commandlets against it, because that scenario is actually created in the central management store. That needs to now replicate down to the front-end service, and then the CLS service actually needs to pick up and say, hey, there's this new custom scenario. So the moral of the story is when you create a new scenario, you can't just start using it right away. There is a period of time that you have to wait. It's not long, a couple minutes. The other note is that, unfortunately, there's a known bug that when you create a custom scenario, if you specify this level here to be all, we don't actually log anything, which is kind of the inverse of all. So it's a bug. We know about it. We're considering it for future updates for releases. But basically what I'm suggesting is that you use either the verbose level or the debug level if you're creating a custom scenario. Okay? So some examples of how you can start and stop CLS logging in your environment. Again, there's a whole lot of permutations as to how you can do this. You can pick pools. You can pick a specific server. You can leave those parameters off, and it will just start it on every server in your environment. But I have given you some common examples here. So the first example is I want to turn on always on. Always on isn't on by default. You actually have to tell it to go and be on. And then when you did, it'll just be running all the time. If I wanted to start another scenario, so in this example, I'm going to start the incoming and outgoing call scenario. I can actually just do a start CLS logging, pick my scenario, and in that example, I've targeted at a particular pool. So CLS service will go in. It will say, hey, I know pool 01 or pool1.contoso.com has these 4 front ends, and it will actually start logging on all 4 of those front ends. Okay? Next example is I know specifically the server that I want to target this to, or the servers. So maybe it's only 2 front ends in my environment. You can actually specify the computer's parameter, and you can list multiple front ends in there. Yeah, question?
Is CLS available on SBAs and SBS?
So the question for the recording is the CLS agent available on SBAs and SBSs? And yes, it is. It's a Lync role like everything else.
He's always on sticky after a reboot?
So the question is always on sticky after a reboot? That's a great question, and not one that I know the answer to, but the gentleman in the front is waving his hand like no. No? Okay, so we would need to start that up. It's a good question. Question?
Any concern about log space with the always on?
So his question is there any concern about log space? So there's I don't have it on here, but it's get-cs CLS configuration, and you can actually set the maximum, I think, file size and then folder size in there so that it will just roll over after a while. So you would determine how much file space you had on that server or wherever the logs are being created, and then roll over. Yeah, question?
Can you do that for your other scenario as well? Or basically, if you have always on, you can have another scenario?
Yeah, I think the maximum file size and folder size applies to CLS in general running on that machine. Okay? And then when you're done, you just issue the commandlet stop-cs CLS logging, and it would stop. If you weren't sure what was running, you can run get-cs CLS logging, and it will show you what logging types are actually running. So once that's done, we've then collected a bunch of files, and they're sitting on the individual servers, or if you've changed the configuration to point them to a central spot, they'd be in a central spot. Doesn't really matter. You don't need to worry about it. All you need to worry about is running the search-cs CLS logging commandlet. You tell it what component you want. Again, you have options as to how you want to filter this. Do I want to go against all servers in a pool? Do I want to go against a particular computer? Or if I leave both of those off, it searches all the servers in my environment. Use the output file path parameter to say create this sip.log file. And then one really important thing to remember is that if you've created a custom scenario and you've changed the default log level from info to something higher, you actually need to specify that log level in your search commandlet. Otherwise, it just defaults to searching those log files for only the info messages. So you might get really frustrated, like maybe I did at one point. So I was doing this, and I was logging, and I ran the manual logging tool on the server and collected log files and could see, yeah, there's some verbose logs there. Went back, created my custom scenario, set it to verbose, collected the log files, searched, didn't specify log level, got back nothing. Only got back the TL info messages, and I couldn't figure it out. And that's why you actually need to change the log level in your search commandlet as well. Okay? Super important. I didn't put this slide up here because, like I said, I just said on the last slide, you really don't have to go in and do anything to these files. You don't have to search them. You don't have to copy them. You don't have to do anything to them. But I did want to point it out in case you were curious, because a lot of times people are curious about things. Where are they stored? So when you go into the CLS configuration setting, it comes up and tells you to store the log files in %temp %/tracing. Well, if you're on a server logged in as administrator 1, and you go to %temp%, what folder do you get? Right? The temporary folder for administrator 1. Well, CLS runs as the Lync account. The Lync account runs as network service. So the network service temp directory is here. See Windows Service Profiles, Network Service, App Data, Local Temp. Okay? So if you're looking for those files and you're trying to figure out where they are, that's where they are. And the other reason that I put this up here is because there's actually this HDR file that gets created, and that HDR file basically logs when you started and stopped a particular session, the highest level that you picked for that component logging, and then the actual components that were created. Again, not really anything that you need to worry about per se to be able to use this. It's just sort of an interesting data point, which is actually how I found out that we had a bug. Because I created a custom scenario, set the level to all, went here, and there was no components listed. Okay? Any questions on that? Cool. So there are some really good resources out there. I don't have enough time to cover kind of everything in CLS. I kind of wanted to give you the basics so you could get into your labs, build a custom scenario, start, stop, do some searching, and then kind of take it from there. So there's a really good TechNet URL there. There's also a blog post on a site called My Lync Lab, which goes into a lot of depth about all this stuff. And then there's also a blog post from my coworker Jens from when this service was originally released. So it's got a little bit of dated information in it, but it also has some good background on CLS in there as well. Okay? So now that we talked about that, so we talked about the snooper tool. We talked about how to capture logs using centralized log service. I'm not going to go into how to capture logs using the Lync logging tool because I'm assuming that we all know how to do that. If not, we can do it here in the lab. But what I want to do is now I want to walk through this actual broken scenario. So this is kind of the high-level depiction of my environment. I've got an external client that's in the internet, right? It's all in my self-contained lab, so there really is no true internet, but it's in the internet. It's connected to a Lync environment, and that Lync environment is connected to a PBX. And hanging off that PBX, I have a phone. Okay? All simulated in my lab environment. If we need more detail, we can drill into it as we go. Basically, I have a user that's on that external client. Typically, they would dial 1002, so they are configured for 4-digit dialing. That would normalize to 1-425-555-1002. That would get forwarded off to my PBX. PBX user should ring. Unfortunately, in my lab environment right now, evil administrator has made some changes, and that's not working. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to run through live with a volunteer, how kind of the starting point, what we would be thinking as we go through this, and then as we go, Nick and I will point out some interesting facts. So, Bob, you want to come on up?
Bob's a good sport.
So Bob, Nick and I have actually worked with Bob for, 2 or 3 years now? Bob's a customer of ours, and we've worked together a lot. So we kind of surprised him this morning and said, hey, you're going to help us with this session.
So yes, Bob, prior to this, did you know what the scenario was? No. Did you know that you'd be doing troubleshooting? Okay.
Perfect. That's the goal. So I know Bob's a little nervous. He's not sure what he's up against. He knows that Nick and I can be somewhat evil at times. but it's really not that bad, and we're going to kind of walk through it as a group together. So I need to switch the screen so you can all see what's going on. So we have RDP environment client 04 is my external client. His name is player 4 at P52, and he's not signed in right now. He wants to be able to dial 1002, which should make this 3CX phone ring. And it will work. So where would we start?
So for troubleshooting,
Yeah.
make sure that the client is actually enabled for logging.
Okay, so can we walk through that? So yeah, so the first thing you want to make sure, if you're sitting down in front of an actual Lync client, hey, are we enabled for logging? Yes, we are, right?
So that's good.
Okay,
Next, I personally would probably purge all of the existing log files so we can start fresh.
okay, that's a good idea. And so that's really key, right? You want to make sure, maybe we would want to save them off in case we had to go back and look back later. But yeah, it's always a good idea to be starting fresh. If eventually you're encountering a problem that you can't solve, that eventually you're going to move to Microsoft support, they might want you to capture a clean, like you said, a clean set of log files. So give me a log file that start with a particular time, tell me what that time is, tell me the issue, and then capture the log file going forward. That's not part of the demo. Just hit close. It's fine. It's a lab. It's not connected to the real internet, so I can't activate it. I know. Should fuzz that out when we do the recording. Okay, so the client doesn't appear to be signing in at this point. So now what would your kind of thought process and approach be at this point?
Well, my initial thought process would probably be something along the lines of DNS issue or routing issue, but you use the logs and snooper to see what's going on.
Okay. So is anyone aware of the new feature that we've introduced in the Lync client called the Lync sign-in logs? No? Some shaking heads? Do you know where that is, Bob? Yeah. So it's actually a new feature we released as part of a CU. I'm not 100% sure which CU it was. We were talking yesterday, maybe CU3, CU4. But at some point along the line, we introduced this new feature. And basically what it does is it actually shows you... Did this demo yesterday too. Oops. Copy to clipboard. Paste. So it actually shows you what it's doing, right? So it says, like Bob said, I'm suspecting a DNS issue. I'm suspecting some connectivity. I'm not quite sure. I'm going to go to snooper log. And what we wanted to try and do in the client was we wanted to kind of try and surface that into something that was a little bit easier to read through rather than having to actually go into a snooper log. We may have to get there eventually, but we kind of wanted to surface that stuff. So do you see anything in there that might tip you off as to where we're trying to connect to or how we're trying to connect?
Sure, the server equals looks like a FQDN port range.
Okay.
External, so I assume that's the access edge.
Okay. So now at that point, now that we've kind of figured that, I see we're starting a login session, we're doing a login attempt, I can see the SIP URI, I can see the server, but we're still not connecting. So what would your kind of next step be at that point?
Probably use telnet and check if I can hit the port.
Okay.
See if the name resolves.
We might have done this demo yesterday. Okay, so port's not available. Do I know, is name resolution good? Are we able to resolve the name?
Check that first.
SIP L15.
p52.ca. It's a lab, takes a few seconds to resolve DNS. Yeah. Okay, so we got an address that matches. We tried to telnet. We've got an address, so we know that the DNS side is good. So does anyone know why there was actually a server there already that we tried to contact? The external record was there. but we didn't, in those client logs, we didn't actually show doing any kind of a lookup for that server name. Sorry? Yeah. Do you guys know what file do we store that in? Endpoint configuration cache, exactly. So, in the Lync, I don't know what you want to call this, log tracing directory, there's a folder that's created for each user, and then there's this file created called the endpoint configuration cache. Some data in there that you can read, some data that you can't. But in this case, we can actually see that there was a value in there for a server, and that's what we tried to connect to. So if that wasn't there, if I had been really evil demo person and deleted the endpoint configuration cache, how would we have proceeded?
You can check Lync Discover.
Okay.
Check if you can actually connect to Lync Discover and pull back your auto discover.
Okay.
Check the SRV records for fallback. Make sure that that's there. You use test connectivity website.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean that would all have surfaced in that client logs option. So if you're using a Lync client that doesn't have Lync client logs enabled, now we would have actually needed to open up the snooper file. So why don't we actually go ahead and do that, just to show. So if I go into tracing and I open up this log file, snooper. Okay. So we don't see any messages in the messages tab. What does that tell us? The fact that there are no messages there in that messages tab.
That there was either no such specific information in the log file you're trying to open, or Snooper is not able to decode them.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that what you see in Snooper is on the left-hand side, you see traces, which is the actual trace file that ends up in the UCC API log file. And then Snooper interprets some of those trace files and displays them as messages in the messages pane. So the fact that we actually have no SIP messages, have we actually tried to send a register to the Edge server yet?
Tried, possibly, but did it get there?
No. So we didn't actually send any data out across to the Edge server. Okay, so we know we tried to tell that to the Edge server. It's not functional. Where would you go now?
Check firewall settings, see what's blocking access to port 443 on the Edge.
Okay.
Or
So
to security, see what change they made, if we knew it was working.
So let's pretend that we did that. We had wandered down. We talked to our security guys. There's no firewall changes. They checked. They looked. Firewall's good.
Check the Edge server, see if the Access Edge service is actually running.
Okay.
Netstat, see if it's listing on 443.
Yeah, so let's do that. So let's go the netstat option. No, you got to actually go to the pick L15 Edge. There we go. So what netstat dash?
I would do probably ANP TCP search string for 443.
Yep. Yeah. So while Bob's doing that, so what he's doing is he's actually running a netstat on that Edge server to see whether or not port 443 is running.
And it looks like it's listening on
.211. And what address was it that we were trying to connect to? I don't know if you caught that before. It was 210. Right. So the Access Edge is listening on 211, but remember, an Edge server listens on port 443 on multiple IP addresses, right? Because we have multiple roles. We have the Access Edge role, web conferencing, and AV Edge role, and they all listen on 443. So how would you actually be able to figure out which process is actually listening on that? Oh. You would actually want to do an A and O. So if we do A and O, it'll actually show you the process number.
You got the TCP.
Oh. Okay, so that's actually going to show me process 3172. Yep. And I realize that I'm being kind of, we might just go, someone might just have blurted out, well, let's check if the service is running, right? That would be, it's in the background, and you can see that it's running, but it probably hasn't hit refresh. Okay, so we see that 3172 is the data proxy. So that's normal, right? That should be listening on 443.
Right.
So there's no other rogue process listening on 443 that's preventing us from connecting to it or something like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so now the next logical step would be to
check the access edge servers.
yeah. And I realized that, maybe that's a simple break, and you probably, if you were monitoring your environment correctly, you would have known that already. And I'm using it more as an illustration of the process to go through, right? Because as Bob said, it's probably more likely a firewall change that caused this problem rather than the edge service being stopped, right? And so I'm using a rather simplistic break to demonstrate that there could have been other problems and how you would want to try and think through and figure out the problem, right? Because if it was a firewall problem, you probably would have gone and checked the edge server first and say, oh, yeah, the services are running, we're listening on 443. Then you would go, oh, maybe it's a firewall problem. Let's go and work with the teams. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's go ahead and start that up. Is there anything else there that looks kind of weird? Yeah, audio video edge is set to disabled. Yeah, sure. You got to set it to automatic. Okay, so we had a client, couldn't sign in. We actually could see the server that they were trying to connect to without even opening a snooper trace file. But we also, when we did open that file, we saw no messages. So we could have actually gone in through those traces and seen that it was trying to connect to that server. But those client logs, like I said, in the new released version of Lync 2013 are helpful in this situation. Okay, so service has started. You want to go see if we can connect now? And
This is when Murphy kicks in.
Well, right, because yesterday I said, well, this might actually take a little while, and then it signed in like immediately, and today I didn't say that, and now it's actually taking a little while to sign in. So what I think is happening here is it's actually going back through the reboot, the bootstrap process again, because we tried to connect to that last known registrar, it failed, so now we're going back through and doing the rebootstrap process. And like Bob said, the bootstrap process is actually going out and looking for Lync Discover records. Well, I don't have Lync Discover published in my fictitious lab environment, so that's why it's taking a little time to sign in here. But again, we'd actually be able to see that through the trace file. So if I go back here and I close this trace file and I open it up again, I can actually see that it's growing in size, right, which tells me that something's going on. But I still don't actually have, I do. So now I actually have a registrar message, which means that the, yeah.
But it's red.
It's
That's
red.
bad, right?
Is red always bad in a snooper file? No, red isn't always bad. There's a weird thing in my lab right now that this initial re-register doesn't actually complete. So let's pretend that those 3 messages aren't there. And we will eventually get a full register cycle. I don't know why. Why is it doing that? So anyways, what I was going to try and show you before is that when we have this log file open, and we scroll all the way down to our last trace message, I can see that the last trace message file was D83. If you just go up to File and say Reload File, it'll actually go back out, take any new updates that have been made to that file, and load them into Snooper. So you can see the progress that it's making. So it is going through and doing the re-register process again. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to just hit sign in one more time. This is not part of the demo. It should be working. There we go. Okay, so we're signed in. Sorry, I don't want to leave it sitting here because then we're not going to get through all the rest of the other breaks. Okay, so you're signed in, and we want to be able to dial 1002 and have it ring a phone. So let's go ahead and try and dial that number. Uh-oh. Does that look right? No. Okay. What's the problem?
Looks like your normalization rule is fine. It's not correct.
Okay. And so at that point, are we normalizing on the client side, or is this a server side problem, would you think?
Client side downloaded from the address book normalization.
No, actually it's not. But it is client-side. So the client, when it signs in, does it know anything about itself? Does it know who its contact list is? Right? When the client signs in, do we keep the contact list stored anywhere on the client? No, it's stored in memory. So when the client boots up, we dynamically get the contact list, but we also get other things like dial plan, right? So bad normalization rule in the dial plan. So if I were to go back and reload this log file, should I then see that dial plan coming down? Oops. I'll reload. Pardon? So it pulls down the address book over web services, but that normalization that actually occurs on the client side is based on the dial plan that gets assigned to the user via the Lync server. And when we sign in, we actually pull down that dial plan via SIP message to the client. The client then grabs it and then applies the messages. Yeah. So what I wanted to show here by reloading this file is this normal registrar process. And Nick pointed out, is red always bad? Not necessarily. Red isn't always bad. So why are we seeing do you know why we're seeing some reds here as part of the normal sign-in process?
It's determining the authentication method. So, hey, I'm here, tell me how to authenticate to you. Here's authentication credentials, and eventually it gets it matched.
Exactly. So my first register, as you can see over here, I have no authorization. So I've basically said to the server, hey, I'm player 4. I want to sign in, but I haven't provided any authorization credentials yet. So what do you think the server's going to say? No, sorry, you can't actually sign in. And that's what this 401 unauthorized comes back as saying. But what we're trying to show here is that it's actually it's not so much an error, it's kind of part of the normal sign-in process. And it actually comes back and says, hey, you're unauthorized, you need to authenticate, and you have 2 authentication options. You can either use NTLM or you can use this thing called TLS DSK. Anyone know what TLS DSK is? Pardon? CERT. It's a certificate authentication. So basically the server said, hey, you can authenticate either through NTLM or you can authenticate using a certificate, present a certificate. So if I were to go to the next register line, what authentication mechanism do you guys think we used? CertAuth, exactly. So this client, because he had signed in already, had downloaded a certificate, and then he started the CertAuth process. And then you go through this kind of back and forth around, okay, well, you're still not authenticated, but here's some information that I need about the cert, back and forth, and eventually we, we get a 200 OK saying that you've successfully registered. So that's what you should see as part of a normal client sign-in process. So if you open up a log file, you see a bunch of red at the top, don't always be alarmed, right? That's kind of normal. So what I wanted to do was to just kind of point out some interesting things that you can see in this log file. Bob, do you know how we store the time on the client log files?
How you store the time?
Yeah, so the timestamps that are in these client log files, what time zone is it in relation to the... server-side log files are, but the client-side log files is actually the local time of the client. And that's why I wanted to point it out, is because when you're looking at a client log file, I'm looking at the client's local time, not GMT time, not server time. Whereas if we had captured that same register process on the server side, you would actually see those timestamps in GMT time. So remote user, so I can see that the user was remote just by looking at this 200 OK. I can see that right there. Oops, that's really bad circling. It's not Steve Feaster material, is it?
No.
I can also see these record routes, right? So I can see which servers were involved in the path of this message coming back to my end user. So I can see there the FQDN of the access edge, and I can also see the FQDN of the standard edition server that this user should be connected to. And why I'm pointing that out is if you actually needed to go back and say, oh, hey, we had some sort of a problem with the registration process, this now gives me a clue as to what front-end server I want to start CLS logging on, or manually go to that server and start up some logging. There's a couple other interesting pieces in here. Right down here at the bottom. This present state. Is that good? Connected to primary equals yes? That's a good thing, right? Anyone ever see a client sign in limited functionality mode? Right? Your Lync client sign in says you're in limited functionality mode because you failed over to a backup registrar. That would actually come through in this present state line. So the register that you successfully connect to would come back and say, hey, yeah, you're registered. Oh, but guess what? You're not connected to your primary. You're connected to a backup.
While you're on that, there's also the line beneath it says expires 600. So sometimes when you are in that limited state mode and services come back up and you're wondering why the clients haven't come back, it's because they're waiting for that timeout period of 600 seconds before trying to register again.
Before I try and re-register, yeah, again, exactly. Which is why sometimes people say, well, the server came back up and these 3 clients signed back in within 2 minutes, but these other clients over here came back in 8 minutes or 9 minutes. And it's, like Nick said, it's because of that expires and when the client had originally registered.
And that's also part of the reason when we're talking about DR, how long it takes to recover services, is that we got to wait for these clients to kind of re-register and come back in order for us to really consider everything back up and running.
Cool. Okay, so back to our normalization rule problem that we were on. So when I asked how the dial plan gets down to the user, you said it's in a series of subscribe messages? Well, sorry, you said in the 200 OK as a result. Yeah, the 200 OK as a result of the subscribe message has it in it. You're right. So what are those subscribe messages being sent?
The client asking for its policies and other settings to be handed in band.
Cool. So it's basically provisioning itself through a series of SIP subscribe messages. So if you're trying to figure out maybe why a client can't get its contact list or it's not getting the right policy, maybe the subscribe that it sent was never actually responded to. So when I click on this subscribe here, I know the 200 OK that comes back because it's highlighted automatically for me in yellow in this view. If I then change to this subscribe, which is application V&D roaming provisioning, I see the 200 OK down here. And it's actually this one here that we're kind of interested in, is the roaming self. Okay, those are contacts. Those are, that's roaming self. And this one is provisioning. And we want to expand and go to location policy. Anyone know why it's called location policy in here?
I think you mean location profile.
Location profile.
That's the location policy.
Oh, that is location profile. Thank you, Nick. So I'm going to search for location profile. Sorry, I got my own head wrapped location profile.
So he just kind of asked the question. So we're getting dial plan rules back, right? Or we're getting how to normalize phones. Anyone know why it's called a location profile as opposed to just dial plan or normalization rules? Yep, that's what it was called in OCS. Is that previously when you create your dial plan, it would be in that location profile.
Yeah, so we used to call it location profile. Now we call it dial plan. But underlying, the client still subscribes to this thing called location profile and gets back a set of rules. Do you see anything kind of problematic in that set of rules?
It looks like the first pattern is applying before the second one.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so we have someone, evil administrator, has created a new rule that's normalizing the number incorrectly. So again, all this is happening client-side, right? We've kind of figured this out now through the client without actually having to turn on any server-side logging. So where would we go to fix that problem?
The CSCP.
Okay.
The Lync server control thing.
Sure. So let's go there. You can go to EE01. Yeah. And then the control panel should be open. Right there. And actually, no. Let's go here. Just refresh. Just because we're already on. Yeah, we were already on that tab. There we go. Now it says 2. So if you weren't able to kind of capture that in the log file, would you be able to see which dial plan was applying to a user based on where we just were in that dial plan list? Yeah, sorry, if you hit cancel there, So I have 2 dial plans. I have a global and I have a user-based dial plan. Which one applies? Do you know?
If the user dial plan was applied to the user, that one's more specific.
Specific, okay. And whereas the global one doesn't apply as well? Okay. Cool.
Not additive.
Yeah. So trying to just demonstrate here, we have a user-assigned dial plan, and that user-assigned dial plan has some normalization rules in it that aren't correct. So let's go ahead and fix that. Yeah, you can just delete it. Yep. Okay, and commit. And so when you're making that change, where does that change actually get stored? Central management store. Okay, so if the client were to sign in right now, would it get that updated dial plan? Unlikely. And so what do we need? What do we need to wait to happen before we actually go ahead and try and sign in again as that user? Yeah, exactly. So we want to make sure that that topology replicates out to each front-end server. Get dash CS management store application status pipe FT. So I want to clear up a myth, and there's a myth that you always have to be running invoke CS management store replication. Is that true or false? False. You do not need to do that. You need to just be patient. And I say that jokingly. Yeah, Ken has a... What if you're not patient? Well, then you can run it. And I mean, really, it doesn't hurt anything. The problem is whenever you run that, it kind of resets the counter on going out and getting the updates and kind of causes the whole process to start again. So if it's already processing, you're actually making the problem worse by invoking it. But there are times where you may need to invoke it. And when that time would be is, say I had a front-end server that was off for an extended period of time. When the CMS master can't reach one of those individual servers, it goes into this back-off state. So it says, oh, I can't reach it. I'm going to wait 30 seconds to try and reach it again. Oh, can't reach it after 30 seconds. Now I'm going to wait 60 seconds. Can't reach it. And it eventually gets up to a period of time. I don't know if it's 5 to 10 minutes, but it gets to a long period of time where it won't try and contact that server. So if you then bring it back online and you want to get it updated, that would actually be a good time to do an invoke. Okay, so does the server now have the updated? Okay, cool. So we should be able to go ahead and sign in as the user. And now, will the user get that updated policy right away?
If they don't exit out and resign the link,
It'll take a while, yeah.
It will eventually.
It will eventually, yeah. So that timer, that expires timer that Nick pointed out, once that expires timer kicked in and we did a re-register, we'd also do a resubscribe to the location profile, and it would eventually pull itself down.
And by default,
So
all
go
the
ahead.
different
Go ahead,
subscriptions to those profiles and to your contacts happen every 8 hours. So if you're to make a dial plan change and it replicated, clients would start getting that through the process based upon when they had last signed in and where they were in that 8-hour time period. If you had to force a change, then you would need the clients to sign out and sign back in.
Okay, so normalization rule looks good. Okay, let's go ahead and try and call it. So that 3CX phone down there was the phone that was supposed to ring, and it never rang, but
Call
what happened?
connected.
The call connected, right? Yeah.
Call again.
Calling, connecting, 1, 2, disconnected. So it shouldn't do that, right? It should be ringing that PSTN endpoint and actually ring. So at this point, what would you suspect we might be looking at?
Issue with media negotiation. Possibly.
Okay, but it connected.
Well,
And then eventually it connected, it was up for 2 seconds, and then eventually it disconnected. So where would we go to see what had actually happened? Because like you said, that the window opened, it flashed. Yep, okay, so let's go ahead and look at the log.
You know we couldn't have it fixed with 27 minutes remaining.
I thought I was going to get a nice job.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is how you went.
No, that's good. Yeah, so what Bob did was he just searched for the dial string, the 1002 that the user had dialed. So we can see that it normalized correctly. So the invite went out. And then what's the next message that we got back after the invite that went out? Trying. Okay, and was that client side or server side? Did that come from the server? Yeah, so we can see in the server line there at the bottom. Okay, so the translation service, right? So the call hit the translation service, so we know that it's being processed. And then what's this next one? The 101 progress report. Is there anything in there that kind of? Let me zoom in. Yep. So if it's attempting to route to primary pool, should we be routing a PSTN call to a primary pool? No. So that might be a problem. Okay. Is there enough information in that particular line to tell us what that problem might be?
That the environment thinks that the phone number I'm calling is a Lync user.
A Lync user or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's go and see the next line that's in that call stack. Yeah, control 1. Anyone see anything there that looks sort of... Pardon? Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Response group service, announcement service, right? So again, trying to kind of demonstrate here that this is client-side stuff, as long as you know what to look for and kind of think through the call invite logically, that we've now figured out, hey, that response group service is picking up unassigned number. That's the problem. Okay? So go fix that. Now let's be honest. Would everyone have seen that right away if we hadn't flashed it up and kind of pointed it out? No. So it's, I'm kind of trying to move us along because we want to make sure that we get everything done. But also at the same kind of trying to point out that this stuff is in these log files if you know what you're looking at and you know what the call should look like versus what it's actually looking like.
Well, if you had audio, it might have been easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. Fair enough. And it's an RDP to an RDP, and the audio didn't work. I wanted to try and play it, and it just didn't work. So you can just.
The number we're dialing is in the range.
Yeah, exactly. So the number that we're dialing is actually in an unassigned number range, which is. I'm using it as a tool to show troubleshooting, but I'm also using it as a tool to show don't do this in your environment, right? So when you assign unassigned number ranges, those should only match numbers that are inbound to your environment, not numbers that you want to go outbound, because we look at those unassigned number ranges before we actually send the calls out. There's this really smart guy that works in the Unified Communications Center of Excellence that does a really awesome session on advanced... Oh, hey, Doug, you're here. I don't know if anyone's ever met Doug Lottie or seen him speak. He didn't do that session at this Lync conference, but you did do it at last year's Lync conference, right? Advanced voice routing, where Doug goes through all the intricacies of how we take a number that we dial versus when it actually gets sent out. And we don't have enough time to cover it all off, so watch Doug's session from last Lync conference. Okay, so we deleted it. Is that a central management store thing as well?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, so any change... Not any change, but most changes that we're making topology configuration-wise in our environment all get replicated out through the central management store.
You said we always run it.
We just have to be patient. Alrighty. And no, there are no CMS breaks.
No.
That would have been evil.
No one would ever do that to
that.
anyone else.
No. Okay, so it's up to date, and now we can... Actually, Bob, if you want to go into the event viewer on that server. So one thing that you can also do, rather than just kind of checking that, is you can go into your server and you can see that the replicator agent service has received data, right? So you can see that those event IDs show up, and then you can know that it's got the right data. Not every Lync component does this, but some Lync components will actually write event messages out saying, hey, I've received the new configuration, and then I've now applied that new configuration. Unfortunately, the response group announcement service is not one of those services, so we don't actually see that message that says it's. So we have to replicate the data down to the front-end server, but then the actual service that reads that data has to take it, absorb it, and then apply it to itself. So we'll assume that it's done that now. Yeah. Okay, call was not completed or is ended. So we fixed that problem, but now we still have another problem. So what would we do? Back to the client log. Okay, you could do that. Yeah, not all that helpful, right? Yeah, exactly. So the gentleman in the front says it's not a, it's not a 403, so we know it's not a voice policy issue. So, okay, so we'll go back to logs like we were going to do. And again, I mean, at this point, we talked about, you got to clear your. It doesn't seem to be reloading the log file automatically. Yeah, I was doing that before. Yeah. Okay, so there goes our invite again. And now, does red mean bad in this case? Yeah. Yeah, so this is not a normal red that we see. So we go down to the service unavailable. Okay, gateway did not respond in a timely manner. So what do we think the problem could be at this point? Is it a front-end server problem? Probably not likely. Is the mediation service running? Yeah, because that message that we got back is actually from the mediation server service. Okay, and I can see that here in the diagnostic. The component was mediation server. Gateway did not respond in a timely manner. So at least I know that the mediation service is running, and presumably, as you pointed out, it's not a voice policy because presumably we tried to go somewhere, we just couldn't get there. Okay, so how would we go in and figure out when user player 4 dialed 1002 what route it would be trying to use? Yeah, no, you're good. So you would just go in and look at the routes?
Well, see, I have no idea what the environment is.
Yeah.
I think I would start there.
But I mean, so if you wanted to, is there a way that you can go in and enter a number and have the control panel tell you what route would have been created? Yeah, if you go to test case here, so you can actually enter in a number, and you can choose the 1002, go populate from user. So what that will do is that will actually populate the dial plan and the voice policy based on the player. Yeah, do player 4. No, do player 4. There's yeah. Yeah. Okay, so it's actually gone ahead and populated from the user. So now we know that it's normalizing properly. First PSTN usage in the first route is the route 425. So go ahead and check that out. So I have only one functional gateway in my environment, one single PBX. And its address is .32. Oops. That doesn't look right. So I have this other gateway in there. Yeah, 32 is the proper gateway address. Commit. And again, we kind of figured that out just from the client log file. Now, we could have turned on, like we talked about CLS logging before, we could have turned on tracing for incoming and outgoing call, captured a server-side log, and looked through it, but all of this stuff was actually present in the client log file. So now we just need to go ahead and wait for topology to replicate. Patient. There we go. Okay. So now would we expect that the call should route to the correct gateway?
Yeah. As long as everything updates.
Okay, let's go ahead and try it. So I think that's still the same error message that we had before, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so the error message should, I think, so the,
Updated it, it's got help from gateway.
well, right. So the topology replicated, but the actual, the outbound routing configuration hadn't actually subscribed to the topology update yet to reconfigure itself to start using the correct new gateway. So I think if you try it again now you should get a different error message. There we go. Number's not in service. Please check the number and try again. Did it? No, yeah, no, it didn't. No, just close it and reopen it. What's the score of the hockey game, Nick?
It is 2-2. Canada
Oh.
scored late in order to send it
Oh,
into
I
overtime.
like how you didn't give me that update.
Yeah.
But I figured the fact that you hadn't pointed out that the game was over yet probably meant that.
I was all ready when it was 2-1 with 50 seconds left.
Oh, nice. All right, so we've now found that we've got a 404 not found gateway responded with. Zoom in here. User not found. So, pardon? Yeah, so we have the one gateway. We've changed the configuration of the voice policy, so we know we're routing to the right gateway. What do you think the problem could be at this point? So now that we've picked a gateway, what happens after we pick a gateway?
We'll route the call to it, and then it has to know what to do with the call from there.
The gateway does,
Yeah.
right? But before we actually send the call, so once we pick the route, before we actually send the call to the gateway, what do we do with the called number and calling number? Sorry? So we normalize it on the client side. We figure out what number it is. We pick a route. And then before we route it to the gateway, what do we actually do with it at that point? Pardon? Trunk translation rules, exactly. Pardon? Yeah. So again, hit cancel there. So again, I've got a global and then, what is it, pool? So which one would? Pool would be more specific. So it's always the more specific configuration in terms of scope that would apply. That's calling and called. Anything look kind of funky there? So the normalized number was plus 1425, 555, 1002. What is that first rule actually doing? It's taking the last 4 digits and only sending the last 4 digits, but our PBX requires a full 11 digits. Or you could just delete it, yeah. And again, all stuff that we saw just in that client-side log file. Again, that one we could have traced on the server. We could have turned on, translation application to see that the number was normalizing outbound, and you would probably, in a real environment, know what your PBX and what your gateway would be expecting. So. hopefully. All right, so now we just need to wait for that. Any questions while we're waiting for that last change?
It'd be nice if the test would actually capture that.
Yeah.
Rules, take it that one more step so you'd be able to see that, oh, say the capability is good. So
Yeah, exactly. So Ken's point is it would be nice if the test tool actually kind of applied all of the call routing logic that happens, and not just translation rules, but other things like the unassigned number range that we talked about. Maybe even a user might have gotten assigned to a phone number or something like that. So if only we knew someone who like accepted feedback on voice.
Yeah, who might that be?
I wonder who that might be. Oh, that's you, Nick.
Yes. Yeah, that is a feedback item that we are tracking.
All right, cool. So we should be good now, right? We've got 10 minutes left, so I certainly hope so. What happened? Oh.
The automatic hang up instead of.
Hey, look at that. It's ringing. Woo. And call connected. Yes. Thank you, Bob. So now that Bob officially hates me and probably will never talk to me again, so I thank him for that, and I realized that I was kind of pushing the discussion and interjecting at times. But what we really just wanted to kind of do this session for you guys to kind of show you the thought process that we would think through. Does anyone think that you could have solved all those problems in 45 minutes in real life? No. Maybe, right? If you knew exactly what the problem was, and you could have even conceivably gone into your environment and looked at the configuration and the settings and gone, hey, this route was wrong and whatever. But I kind of just wanted to show that it seemed like a rather simple problem on the surface, but it actually had a number of steps to build into it and give you some tools and some strategies to use along the way. So that's kind of all we have for today. If you guys don't have any questions, hope you enjoy the rest of your time here in warm, sunny Las Vegas. I'm getting ready to go back home to Canada in the cold weather. So I'm going to enjoy my afternoon. I hope you guys do too. So thanks for coming.